The propaganda films that he's watched back in Germany spoke of giant fortresses and gun positions. But he's in for a shock.
Imagine my surprise arriving at the beach in Normandy. There weren't any protective bunkers.
Hitler believes the Allied invasion will land at Calais, the closest French port to Great Britain. That's where his Atlantic wall is at its strongest. Few eyes are on the beaches of Normandy. Franz Gockel's diary records happy days spent swimming and playing near the beach at Colville, a stretch of sand that will come to be known as Omaha Beach.
France is a beautiful country, and I see the sea every day. I don't really have that much to do.
It was definitely a cushy life compared to the horrors of the Eastern Front. The men here felt very happy that they were here in France.
November 1943. Events in Russia are going from bad to worse. The Germans have been forced into retreat by a powerful Soviet army.
The Germans lost on average 2,000 men killed in action each day, and that since June 1941.
Hitler and his generals now face a crisis. They have to fight on two fronts. Millions of their soldiers tied up in the east, and 5,000 kilometers of coastline to defend in the west. The Nazis have posted 300,000 soldiers to the bunkers of the Atlantic Wall, but they are inexperienced troops.
The crew here of the bunkers were mainly young soldiers, 17 or 18 years old, or older family fathers in their late 30s. The guys in the early 20s, mid-20s, the best soldier material, as you would call it in military terms, were mainly on the Eastern Front.
The Nazi high command are counting on millions of tons of concrete and steel to make the difference and keep the Allies at bay.
You can say that the bunkers made the soldiers better fighters. You could be a bit overweight, you could be a bit overaged, but you could still pull the trigger on the machine gun.
Bunkers might compensate for the problem of inexperienced troops. But on average, there are still only 100 German soldiers to defend each kilometer of coast. And only 50% of Hitler's impregnable wall has been completed.
This is hopeless. I am the greatest builder of fortifications of all time. And this is all I get.
By November 1943, Hitler runs out of patience with the slow progress of wall construction. He appoints a new commander to take charge. A man whose legendary toughness in battle might make up for the weaknesses of the wall. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel.
Quick, quick, fall in!
Rommel immediately sets about inspecting the entire length of the Atlantic Wall. He's been fighting the Allies in North Africa for 2 years. Rommel is a master of attack and defense. What he sees in Normandy shocks him.
Rommel came to this place here in January 1944, and when he looked at the conditions and how the defense preparations had gone, he was very upset. He was saying, "You've been here for 3 years, and what have you done? Nothing."
German planners believe that the Allies are unlikely to choose it as an invasion site because it lacks a port. So few bunkers have been built here. But Rommel sees something they can't.
This beach looks similar to the Bay of Salerno in Italy that the Allies invaded. It must be instantly secured against Allied landings. If the British once get a foothold on dry land, they can't be thrown out again.
Rommel knows this beach needs to be defended. If the Allies land here, the Nazis could lose the war. He's right to be concerned. Across the Channel, 150,000 Allied troops are massing in secret. The Atlantic Wall is about to face the ultimate test. And at Omaha Beach, Franz Gockel will face the full onslaught of the invasion. By January 1944, Soviet Russia is still pushing the Nazis back in the east. And in the west, Hitler's Atlantic Wall is far from complete. Field Marshal Rommel faces an enormous challenge to improve the quality of the defenses, as he records in his diary.
These fortifications are the work of an engineer who is neither strategically proficient nor has any knowledge of war.
Rommel's experience fighting the Allies has taught him that holding off an invasion will require meticulous planning. And he has a very clear strategy.
Rommel believes that an enemy invasion has to be smashed, if not at sea, on the beach. If the enemy get off the beach, he thinks the game is over.
To defend every beach, Rommel wants thousands more small bunkers for individual soldiers, armed with heavy machine guns. They will be quicker to build, but there's still the problem of manpower.
As the war develops, they don't have the spare manpower within Germany, and they basically draft in the people of these countries, the Poles, the Czechs, you name it, the French, people from concentration camps, Allied prisoners of war, all of which is massively inhumane. Thousands and thousands of them die in these construction projects and through bad diet and bad treatment, and it just becomes slave labor.
32,000 civilians are forced into construction. A brutal but effective plan. Bunkers are being constructed along almost 5,000 kilometers of Nazi coast, clustered in groups known as WNs.
A WN is a Widerstandsnest, which translates into English into resistance nest. You can say it is more or less a strong point, but a series of strong points interconnected.
In Normandy, Gockel and 30 of his comrades live in a strongpoint that still exists today.
We can see here the small room was probably for the NCOs. Here is the accommodation block for the other ranks. Amongst them was also this 18-year-old Franz Gockel. But of course the soldiers did not stay here all the time. They were on guard, they had to build up the constructions, there was general military training.
Gockel's strongpoint is at the east end of a Normandy shoreline that will become infamous. Omaha Beach. To defend it, they have 13 gun positions, including 2 anti-tank guns and 3 mortars. The guns work in pairs, targeting the beach with deadly arcs of crossfire. This tactic creates an area of maximum firepower, known as a killing zone.
The killing zone is basically the area where the enemy is going to bring the maximum effect from all their weapon systems in the most condensed space to inflict the maximum amount of casualties on the enemy, in this case the Allies. What you've got over here is 2 positions. They've got machine guns, mortars, and over here another position, machine guns, mortars, some larger caliber rounds as well. And the reason this box is here is because the Allies are trying to get up that draw and off the beach.
Defending this stretch of Omaha Beach is vital for the Germans to throw back an Allied invasion. Gockel's job is to man a machine gun, and his position covers this kill zone.
This is Gockel's position. Today it's only a hole in the ground. Back in 1944 it had a machine gun, it was a covered position and also had 2 switches for a flamethrower.
Gockel's bunker is finished by May 1944, along with thousands more that protect the coast from Norway to the Spanish border. But Rommel still isn't satisfied. The bunkers alone are not enough. He also wants other types of defensive structure to help repel an Allied invasion.
What Rommel does, he uses the experience he's gained in North Africa to bring about dramatic changes. And one of those involves the laying of massive minefields.
He orders the laying of 50 million mines along the French coast, at sea and on the beach. And in addition, he wants the beaches filled with obstacles, row after row littering the beach, to create impenetrable layers of defense. The first line by the low tide mark are steel barriers known as Belgian gates.
You've got Belgian gates put along here. The idea behind these Belgian gates is to block the landing craft, infantry and tanks and basically hold them as far back down the beach as they can.
Belgian gates create a barrier to slow down infantry and tanks, giving the Germans more time to kill them. In case the Allies arrive at high tide and sail over the Belgian gates, Rommel devises another surprise.
Right here is where they have the ram logs. Think about telegraph poles, cut, raising above my head, 30-degree angle, a couple of other ones supporting it down here. At the end of these, you're going to have basically like saw blades, which is there to rip the bottom out of the landing craft if the Allies come in at high tide.
But even that's not enough. The Germans use absolutely anything that might disrupt and delay the landing force.
Here you have the third belt, and this is what they call Czech hedgehogs. They are basically steel structures set at angles like this, and basically to disrupt anyone that's coming up the beaches.
And if the landing craft finally make it onto the beach, these are the last line of defense to stop Allied tanks in their tracks.
So this is a steel-encrusted concrete tetrahedra, and this is one of the last obstacles on the obstacle plan for defending the beaches. You can imagine if there'd be a whole load of these all across the breach, interlinked at, every 5 meters and 5 meters. Tank's going to struggle against this, It's so sturdy. It's going to turn the tank. Which way is the track's going to go? Especially thin track tanks slip off the side,
By June 1944, Rommel is still trying to complete German defenses along the Atlantic coast. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the Allied troops are ready. Hitler's Atlantic Wall has cost billions of Reichsmarks and consumed millions of tons of concrete, but it's still riddled with holes.
Rommel promised Hitler that he would have finished everything by May 1944, but it was still incomplete. So many of the bunkers on the Atlantic Wall were lacking guns, or were lacking men, or were lacking barbed wire or minefields.
The 5th of June. Gockel spends the day patrolling the cliffs above Omaha Beach. Unknown to him, just over the horizon, thousands of British, Canadian and American troops have put out to sea to start an invasion.
At 2 o'clock in the morning on the 6th of June, the 7th Army gave the alert level 2. This was the highest alert level in the German army. And immediately the men from the artillery regiment, and in this case from the 1st Company, moved into their positions here at WN 62.
Wake up! Get up! Get up! This is for real! The Americans are parachuting in, just 30 kilometers away!
There was an alarm call, but none of us believed it. We'd had so many in the past weeks that we no longer took it seriously.
You too, Gockel! Get out!
we ran to our positions. Machine guns, heavy guns, and mortars were prepared.
Gockel and his comrades believed the invasion would come at a major port, like Calais. Never did they imagine that it would happen here, at their beach.
Has Gockel got ammunition? Well, go, check!
Hitler and a lot of others were fairly convinced that it would have to be a major port because they would have to get their material ashore. Little did they know that the Allies had countered that. They'd come up with the Mulberry Harbours.
The Allies invent an ingenious way of avoiding the heavily fortified ports. They build the world's first floating harbour, known as the Mulberry Harbour, and tow it to Normandy.
Gockel, do you need ammunition?
Yes.
Good luck.
I tried to concentrate on my weapon, to take my mind off what was happening.
Normally a German machine gun should be manned by 2 soldiers. Here we had only 1 man per machine gun.
Allied battleships begin a full-scale bombardment of the German positions. Gockel's survival now rests on whether the reinforced concrete of his bunker is tough enough.
Heavy caliber shells continue to slam into the earth, howling and hissing through the air. They hit against the concrete and ground with a thud.
Gockel's bunker withstands the onslaught, but this is just the beginning. When the Allied forces land, they're met with a hail of machine gun fire. Just 500 Germans have to defend a 6-kilometer beach against 35,000 Americans. The ultimate test of the Atlantic Wall has begun.
The Germans are firing with each weapon they've got available here. With their flamethrowers, with their machine guns, with their field guns, with their artillery from further inland. This was when German firepower was the biggest.
Omaha is just one of 5 invasion beaches. 150,000 American, Canadian and British troops are landing along the Normandy coast, and the enormous Atlantic Wall is beginning to crack. 160 kilometers away, the German armored reserve of tanks are waiting. If they're called up to plug the gaps, there's still a chance that the Allies can be thrown back. But there's a problem.
Hitler was asleep, and no one dared to wake him up. And this was crucial because Hitler was the person who could release the armored reserves. And when he woke up, he still didn't believe it was a full invasion.
The tanks remain far inland. And the only other man who can make a difference is even further away, in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday.
Rommel said the first 24 hours are crucial to defeat the Allied invasion. And on the 6th of June, he was not here. And it was only in the late afternoon that Rommel rushed back from Germany and arrived in France to coordinate the defense measures. But by that time, the Allies had already a firm grip on the beaches here.
At 9 a.m., 7 hours after the first shots are fired, the bunker next to Gockel's position is destroyed. His machine gun is the last one still firing from his group of bunkers.
Sand caused the belt of my machine gun to jam. I had to continue using my rifle, firing single shots.
Amazingly, the Germans are holding back the Americans. But despite the months of preparation, they're running low on ammunition.
The Germans were supposed to have ammunition for 48 hours on the Atlantic Wall. In reality, they had only in this section only ammunition for 3.5 hours. So at 10 o'clock, the Germans were starting to run out of ammunition.
As their supply of bullets is depleted, the Germans begin to struggle, and the Americans gain ground. Gockel and his comrades are forced to fall back.
I was making my way up a slope. I crawled to the top to reach my comrades. I saw 3 fingers on my left hand dangling by the threads.
Now wounded, Gockel retreats with the few survivors of his company. Omaha is the last of the 5 invasion beaches to fall. The vast Atlantic Wall has taken 3 years to build, but is breached in a matter of hours. The Germans lose the battle and will soon lose the war.
Despite all the costs, millions of Reichsmark and millions of cubic meters of concrete built into these structures, the Atlantic Wall could not hold the Allied invasion force.
The Atlantic Wall doesn't work for a number of reasons. It's stretched too far, there are too many gaps in it. The basic policy behind it is flawed. The Germans never come up with a grand plan of how to fight this machine they've built, how they're going to take it into war.
Despite the wall's failure, Zabadorsch remained head of the Todt organization until Germany's surrender. After the war, he had a successful engineering career until his death, aged 86. Rommel was forced to commit suicide by Hitler just 4 months after D-Day. Franz Gockel survived the war, returning to Germany where he married and lived until the age of 80. He came back to Normandy several times to remember the men who died for and against the wall.
I think D-Day is probably the most important event in Europe to have occurred perhaps over the last 500 years. To kick Nazi Germany back into touch and to take back control for civilization. I think it's an absolutely astounding event. And it works because the Allies got their act together and the Germans never did.